Let me show you something worth noticing. There's a specific kind of person who never seems reckless with money. They read the articles. They understand compound interest. They know what they're supposed to do. And yet, year after year, they do nothing. Not because they're lazy, not because they don't care, but because they're waiting for a feeling that never arrives. They're waiting to feel ready. And that wait costs more than almost anything else they'll ever pay for. You see it in the 32-year-old who's been meaning to open a retirement account for 3 years. She's done the research. She knows which funds to choose. She's read the guides, watched the videos, bookmarked the articles, but she hasn't opened the account because something still feels uncertain. Maybe she needs to understand it just a little better. Maybe she should wait until after this work project settles down. Maybe next month when things feel clearer. You see it in the couple who's been talking about investing for 5 years. They've had the same conversation dozens of times. They agree it's important. They agree they should start. But every time they get close, one of them raises a concern. What if we pick the wrong thing? What if the market crashes right after we start? What if we need that money for something else? And so the money sits in a savings account, earning nearly nothing, while they wait for the moment when it all feels obvious and safe. This isn't procrastination in the usual sense. These aren't people who are avoiding thinking about money. They think about it constantly. They're not uninformed. Often, they know more than people who've been investing for years. The problem isn't knowledge. The problem is they're waiting for knowledge to create a feeling it cannot create. They're waiting to feel certain, and certainty doesn't come from understanding. It comes from experience you don't have yet. Here's what makes this so expensive. The cost isn't just the returns they miss. It's that the psychological bar keeps moving. Every year they wait, the decision feels bigger because now they're not just starting, they're starting late. And starting late feels like admitting something. It feels like evidence of a mistake. So the emotional weight increases, which makes the feeling of readiness even harder to achieve, which means they wait longer, which makes it worse. You can watch someone spend a decade in this loop, and the strangest part is they often don't realize it's happening because the waiting feels productive. It feels like they're being responsible, careful, thoughtful. They're not ignoring the problem. They're taking it seriously. So seriously, in fact, that they can't move forward until they're completely sure. But here's what they don't see. The feeling they're waiting for isn't on the other side of more research. It's on the other side of action. The feeling of readiness doesn't enable the decision. The decision enables the feeling. Think about what happens when someone finally does start. Not because they suddenly figured everything out, but because something shifted. Maybe they got frustrated with themselves. Maybe a friend said something that landed differently. Maybe they just got tired of thinking about it. And they open the account, they make the first transfer, they pick something reasonable, even if it's not perfect, and then a strange thing happens. The decision that felt enormous beforehand starts to feel smaller, not because it wasn't important, but because it's no longer hypothetical. It's real, and real things have a different emotional texture than imagined things. The questions that felt paralyzing when they were abstract start to feel manageable when they're concrete. Because now there's feedback, now there's something to adjust, now they're learning by doing, which is the only way this particular kind of learning actually happens. The people who wait don't realize they're asking their brain to do something it's not designed to do. They're asking it to generate the confidence that comes from experience without having the experience. And the brain can't do that. It can simulate, it can imagine, but it cannot create the felt sense of familiarity that makes something stop feeling risky. That only comes from repetition, from lived exposure, from the slow, boring process of seeing something work in real time. And so the person who waits is stuck, not because they lack intelligence, but because they're waiting for an internal signal that will never fire under these conditions. Here's the part that's hard to see from the inside. The cost of waiting isn't evenly distributed, it's exponential. Because of compounding, yes, but also because of psychology. The longer you wait, the more your identity becomes shaped around being someone who hasn't started. And that identity resists change. It starts to feel like who you are, not just what you've done. So starting stops being a simple financial decision and becomes an act of self-revision, which is much, much harder. You can meet someone at 45 who's been meaning to invest since they were 30, and the way they talk about it now is different. There's a heaviness, a self-consciousness. They know they've waited too long. They know it's cost them. And that knowledge doesn't motivate them. It paralyzes them further because now starting means confronting what they've lost. And that confrontation feels unbearable. So they continue to wait. Not for readiness now, but for some future version of themselves who can handle the regret. This is what makes readiness so expensive. It's not just the money. It's the way it compounds emotionally, the way it transforms a simple action into a referendum on your competence, your discipline, your worth. And once that transformation happens, the bar for starting becomes impossibly high. The people who avoid this trap aren't necessarily braver. They're not more confident. Often, they're just less reflective. They don't spend as much time interrogating their feelings. They don't wait for internal alignment. They act with a kind of casual imperfection that people who wait find almost offensive. Because it seems careless, it seems like they're not taking it seriously. But here's what the people who wait miss. Taking something seriously doesn't mean thinking about it endlessly. Sometimes it means acting before you feel ready. It means treating the decision as smaller than it feels. It means accepting that you're going to start imperfectly, adjust as you go, and learn things you couldn't have learned any other way. Because the alternative isn't careful planning. The alternative is a decade of increasingly expensive hesitation. There's a particular kind of regret that comes from waiting too long. It's not the sharp regret of a mistake. It's the diffuse regret of inaction. The feeling that you knew what to do. You had the resources, you had the time, and you still didn't move. That regret is harder to process because there's no external event to blame, no bad advice, no sudden crisis, just the slow accumulation of days where you chose to wait. And the thing about that regret is it doesn't teach you to act. It teaches you that you're someone who doesn't act, which makes the next decision even harder. So here's what shifts when you see this pattern clearly. You stop treating readiness as a prerequisite. You start treating it as a result. You stop asking, "Am I ready?" and start asking, "What's the smallest version of this I can do right now?" And you do that, not because it feels right, but because waiting feels worse, and because you finally understand that the feeling you're waiting for will never come from thinking. It only comes from doing. That's not advice. It's just what happens when you stop mistaking caution for wisdom. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next.